to our final session of the night. And I think here is where we're going to take a step back. We've spent yesterday and today concentrating on financial wealth in terms of money. I think our next session is going to take that a step further. We are going to go beyond dollars and cents, and we're going to understand the true meaning of wealth. Wealth is not only money. Other things can be considered as wealth. And we're going to have the lovely Catherine talk us through that. So, Catherine, if you're okay, I would like to introduce you first before handing the floor over to you. Thank you. So, Catherine Marks is a consultant. She's a freelance consultant and an ex-finance director with a master's degree in philanthropic studies. After a 20-year career in finance and M&A, Catherine is embracing a shift in her values and is currently studying for a master's degree in philanthropic studies, undertaking a number of voluntary consulting roles in the nonprofit sector and working in finance learning and development with a focus on helping financial professionals connect with purpose. She's also a trained personal financial coach. During her finance and M&A career, she has worked across the financial services, media, telecoms, and tech industries in the UK, US, and Switzerland. She qualified as a CA at Deloitte and led financial planning and analysis at O2 and was the Vice President of Finance at Depop. Her current voluntary roles include working as a consultant for the Cranfield Trust, the For and Impetus to support non-profit organizations. So, Catherine, welcome, and I'll hand over to you. I think you might be on mute, though. Still on mute? You able to unmute? You seem to be stuck on mute. I don't know, Emmanuel, would you be able to assist us with this, please?
Success, I think. Go. Can you hear me?
Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you so much. Thank you, Catherine.
Thanks. Thanks to you, Hina, and thanks to everyone for sticking right through till the end on a Friday night. Let me just fire up my slides. One moment. There we go. I think everyone's seeing that okay?
We are. Thank you, Catherine.
Fantastic. So I hope that I can use this last session of the evening to get you thinking about wealth much more holistically. So as the title suggests, beyond dollars and cents or pounds and pence or any other currency for that matter. Now I've only got 20 minutes, but what I'm aiming to leave you with really is 3 key ideas. So firstly, that true wealth is not just about financial success. Secondly, that 9 till 5 till you're 65 isn't the only option. And yes, I know in many cases, including my own, it definitely hasn't been 9 till 5 either. For me, that was part of the problem, but we'll get to that. And thirdly, having a mindset of enough rather than accumulation. So, what is wealth? You're here today at a conference about financial empowerment, about strategies for building wealth. But I find that a too narrow lens to think about wealth. You know, despite the fact that we might be in a cost of living crisis, the temptation to spend and consume is all around us. It infiltrates every physical, digital space around us, and it's pushing us and our planet to its limits. We're still operating financially by rules established during the Industrial Revolution. You know, at that time, the huge success of the introduction of machinery to do work previously done by humans meant that economic activity was slowing down. People asked for shorter work weeks and more leisure time, but we didn't accept that. Instead, we introduced the concept of standard of living, and we educated people to want not only what they needed, but also new things that they didn't need. And we've come to believe that it's our right to consume, and we can be unconscious about our financial belief systems. There's many types of wealth. at least 5 that are listed here, which I've adapted from an article by James Clear, who wrote Atomic Habits. And you may think of more than the 5 that are on the screen. James Clear considers wealth the power to choose. I think that I'd agree with that at the individual level, but there's also the abundance of our societies and our planet to think about, which we'll come to. Financial is one type of wealth. It's the power to choose how to spend money. Social's a second type of wealth. That's often about status, though it can also be about community. Then time, the freedom to choose how we spend it, doing work that we want to do, our leisure time, our traditional retirement time. And then our physical and mental wealth or health. We need to be really wary about dedicating so much of our energy to financial wealth and social status at the cost of these others, because in the end, these are our most finite resources. Does anyone recognize that feeling of being stuck on a treadmill? I have certainly felt like this many times. We can live for having it all, but then often what we have is never enough. What is success for you? Consuming, accumulating, money as security, as power, as social acceptance? Economics worships growth, but nature is not infinitely abundant. We're living in a polycrisis, and still we push for a higher standard of living, regardless of moral, ethical, and environmental consequences. Our planet's nearing its capacity, and we can't support an ever-expanding economy. We're borrowing from future generations. So what is your enough? Even just at the financial level, are you clear how much you need? I've spent too much time lacking clarity about that. And in a moment, I'll show you a couple of slides that I wish I'd been aware of much sooner than I was. But first, I wanted to introduce you to a great Spanish word. I'm going to apologize in advance for my pronunciation. Aprovechar. It means to use something wisely. And I really like this word because I don't think we have such a neat English equivalent. So instead of the more is better mentality, it's about the wise stewarding of money, time, energy, space, possessions. It's not necessarily about penny pinching, but it's about honoring our most precious and finite resources, our time, our health, and our planet. It's not necessarily about cheap versus expensive, but recognizing that anything we buy and we don't use, things that we throw away, things that we consume but don't enjoy, is money down the drain. It's wasting our life energy and wasting the finite resources of our planet. So let's look at a couple of practical things. How big does your retirement pot need to be? Do you know? I'm going to touch on the rule of 25 and the 4% rule. I'll note that this is not financial advice. You should take this and, of course, everything that's been shared at this conference and consider it in the context of your own situation. What I'm sharing is simply some maths, which has been helpful for me. I've borrowed this table on the slide because I liked the visual. It doesn't matter that it's in dollars. The same maths applies in any other currency. Though, as well as considering your own situation, there will, of course, be tax to consider, which, of course, works differently in different countries. So when we're talking about your retirement pot, that means your full portfolio. So pensions, perhaps ISAs in the UK, other investments. And the amount that you'll need depends, of course, on how much you're going to be spending. And this isn't a perfect science, but as a rule of thumb, to at least get some context around it, you'll need 25 times your annual spend in your retirement pot. So if you want to be able to spend £30,000 a year, you'll need £750,000 at the point that you would like to reach financial independence. That sounds like a big number, at least it does to me. But in a moment, we'll have a look at the power of compound interest, which helps us to accumulate. Not accumulate more and more possessions, but accumulate towards our financial independence. But first, let me introduce the 4% rule, or what is known as the safe withdrawal rate. This is set out in a research paper by a financial advisor who was looking for a rule of thumb to give his clients on how much they could safely withdraw from their assets. He modelled historical data from people who retired every year since 1926, asking the question, how much could they have withdrawn, adjusting for inflation without running out of money? And he concluded 4% of the initial portfolio amount. It's worth noting that there are other schools of thought with different views that 4% may be more like 3.4%. So again, there's not a perfect science. Do please hold this lightly, but I think it's a really good starting point for the big picture. How on earth do we get there? Given I haven't got a long time and we've had a lot of other great speakers over the course of this conference that have been focused on financial strategies, I won't spend too long on this, but I did want to make sure that everyone's aware of the power of compound returns, or this snowball effect. This graph shows you what a £100 investment per month will look like over a period of 40 years. For this example, I've assumed a 7% return. The blue colour that you can see there at the bottom is the value deposited, and the orange is the interest building up. So in the earlier years, you can see it's quite small, but the further out you go is where the magic happens, or not really the magic, just the maths. After 10 years, your £100 per month means you will have deposited £12,000, and your overall investment will have grown to just over 17,000. After 20 years, that will be £24,000 deposited and just over £57,000 total investment value. And all the way over to the right, over 40 years, you will have deposited £48,000. And look at the value of the investment, £262,000. So you can see this is about being in it for the long term, and the earlier that you can invest, the better. This second example is based on depositing £10,000 today, but with no ongoing deposits, again with a 7% return. After 10 years, that £10,000 will have doubled, and after 20 years, doubled again. After 40 years, that would have grown to a total value of £163,000. So that's the power of compound interest. I'm going to come on to talk about financial empowerment journeys. And then on the next slide, I'll talk about financial independence. In my view, these are two different journeys. At the start of our journeys, we may be lacking in knowledge or simply complacent. We may be trapping ourselves within limiting beliefs, habitual thinking, repeating financial behaviours that don't serve us because of the stories we often tell ourselves about money and wealth. We may be living our parents' agendas, or doing a job that our 17-year-old self thought was a good idea, but now we're not quite so sure. Our systems don't always make it easy to change. That's another thing I feel strongly about, but it's a topic for another day. If I think about myself, I trained as an accountant. I went and got a job. I worked really hard. I chased promotions on a CFO career path, and I got pay rises. By some measures, I was successful. But what else happened? Lifestyle inflation. I moved to a better place. I ate at more expensive restaurants. I bought a car. I acquired lots of clothes. I traveled to new places. Now, some of that was good, but some of it wasn't. And I was working such a lot, often 70, 80-hour weeks, that I came to a point and I thought, does all of this really serve me? Am I really living my values? I had this deep underlying sense of lacking purpose. That was something that had come up for me periodically across a number of years, not just once. But the difference this time was that I took actions, including confronting my complacency around financial behaviours. I was a person working within corporate finance, And I'd never really taken the time to think about some of the things that I've talked through today in terms of how the numbers work. I was very good at taking care of my clients and companies' financials, but not necessarily my own. Yeah, things like, how much do I actually need to retire? How should I think about the compounding effect of investments over time, as well as understanding the other types of wealth which I'd compromised for too long? So I built my knowledge. Instead of just continuing on the treadmill, I invested the time in developing my awareness and challenging how aligned my life was with my values. And beyond that, recognizing the part that I was playing in the system and my own impact on the planet and future generations. I think this is what real financial empowerment is, or financial integrity. Recognizing money for what it is and integrating our values with our relationship with money and our purpose, not wasting our life energy nor the finite resources of the planet. Lastly, let's have a look at the financial independence journey, which is different from financial empowerment. That's because we can have all the awareness, integrity, but not yet be in a position where we're financially independent. And we're all going to be at different stages. At that first level, we're in survival mode. Here it's about self-preservation, and we're not in a position to start saving or investing for the future. We may be dependent on other people for financial assistance. Stability. Our financial position becomes stable. That doesn't mean optimal, but we're less dependent on others for our financial needs. If anyone is at these stages, then please don't think that getting to the other stages is not for you. It's a journey and it takes time. I think if it's likely that if you're joining this conference, you have the capability to get there at a point in the future. Accumulation. At this stage, we can go beyond supporting ourselves. We can save, invest for our longer term financial future, and think about what wealth means holistically to us. I think this is the stage where many can get trapped in lifestyle inflation, in financial complacency. But if we empower ourselves by increasing our awareness and ultimately our financial integrity, we can move beyond this. Before I talk about strategic, I'll actually come to the last one, financial independence. What does that mean? It can mean different things to different people, but what I'm talking about here is being able to stop working for money, though it doesn't mean you have to. Work has different functions for us. There's the material financial side, but there's also personal needs, emotional, intellectual, psychological. If we break the link between work and financial reward, we can regain values and self-worth as our bottom line. Of course, some of us are fortunate enough to find a high-paying, high-integrity job that meets all of our needs very well and feels that we're paid to do what we feel called to. But that's not always the case. Financial independence means that we have accumulated sufficient resources in our savings, investments, and passive income streams to cover our living costs. The traditional route to that is when we hit retirement age and we draw a pension, but it's not the only way. You may have heard of the FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early. It's often associated with a quite extreme approach to frugality and saving, with stories of people retiring in their 30s and 40s. That's quite extreme, and it may be out of reach and indeed undesirable for many people. But I think that there are different approaches and different journeys to get there. My goal for today was to share the idea that there are different routes beyond the traditional paths. Do you have to be an extreme saver and pinch every penny? No, absolutely not. But also you don't need to consider that continued accumulation and traditional retirement is the only option. That strategic phase represents everything in between. And that's the phase that I consider myself in, having taken a step back from my full-time finance job and realigned with my values. As Hina mentioned at the start, I'm currently focused on 3 things: freelance work, studying for a degree, and volunteering at a number of non-profit organisations. And this, for me, feels more wealthy than only focusing on the financial type of wealth. My journey will be ongoing, and I don't have a plan to hit financially independent anytime soon. But having moved away from financial complacency and having a better appreciation for what is enough is the financial empowerment that I needed. So just coming back to those many types of wealth, of course, there's usually a balancing act. I feel that I've rebalanced. I certainly haven't got it perfectly right. And I'm sure that I'll need to make more changes along the way, but I continue to learn. So yeah, I ask you all if you feel like you're compromised in any one or more of these areas, do you feel that you're serving your community and environment in the way that you'd like? Remember that time and health and that of the planet are our most finite resources. So please do take all of the great financial strategies from this conference, but keep this bigger picture in mind. I'll just wrap up by showing some of the sources that I've based today's presentation on, and some further resources here on the slide. In particular, today's material draws heavily on the book Your Money or Your Life, which is one of the most influential personal finance books of all time, and one of the originators of the FIRE movement. I don't agree with everything in the book or find all of the exercises useful, but I do think it's a really useful place to start. The different types of wealth was adapted from an article by James Clear, and his book Atomic Habits is also an excellent resource. Yield and Spread is focused on finance for good and has an excellent training course, though it's targeted mainly at a US audience. There's a lot of generic information, but some is specific to the US, so you might find others more helpful. There's a lot of sources out there, so do have a look around and find what works best for you. What I liked about the Fioneers is that they have a similar focus on what I've called the strategic stage. Also on there, How to Fund the Life You Want, really helpful book. The same author also has a website called The Evidence-Based Investor. And finally, I'll also mention there at the bottom, Meaningful Money, that it's a guy called Pete Matthews. He's got a load of resources on his website, podcasts and YouTube. So yeah, dive in, have a look around. There's a lot of fantastic stuff, in addition to everything that we've learned through the conference. I would love to connect with everyone on LinkedIn, so do track me down there. I'll drop my LinkedIn in the chat in a moment, but I will pass back to Hina for any questions that may have come up.
Thank you, Catherine, for that fantastic holistic view, looking at wealth as more than just money. But I think personally, I think the biggest thing from there is from what you've said is taking on board the enough mindset, not the accumulation. And I love the way you've sort of articulated weaving in your values into your financial journey. I think that's a different way of looking at it. So thank you again. I think we do have time for one question, if that's okay. And it's actually a question from one of our audience asking if you wouldn't mind expanding a bit more on the 25 and 4% plan. So back to your initial slide that you shared with us.
Sure, absolutely. Let me just fire that back up because I think that one's useful. It's good to have that one in front of us. One moment.
Whilst you fire that up, and similar, if you don't mind, Catherine, once you're off this, there are a few more questions popping up that we won't have time to address verbally, but if you're happy to go back to people, that would be great.
Yeah, no problem at all.
Thank you.
So back to this slide here. So back to the maths. And yeah, let me recap. When we're talking about the retirement pot, I'm talking about everything. So, you know, that may be in pensions, it can be investments, it can be, you know, in the UK, we have ISAs, individual savings accounts, you know, it's everything. And at the point that you want to retire, or should I say, be financially independent when we're not relying on work for our income, then the amount that you'll need, of course, depends on how much you're going to be spending. So that's one to think about. And at that point of retirement, I don't like the traditional word retirement because I think people should really think about what it means for them. And Raz touched on that earlier as well. Anyway, I won't go off on a tangent about that, but yeah, think about what's the amount that you're going to be spending? What do your living costs look like? It might be quite different from right now. You may have paid off a property, for example. That's one of our biggest outgoings. So that might impact it. What you will need is 25 times your annual spend in your retirement pot at the point that you retire or become financially independent. So to recap on the example that I gave, and there's lots of others if you read across in the table there. If you want to be spending £30,000 a year, you'll need £750,000 at the point that you want to retire / reach financial independence. And you'll recall then that I went on and talked about sort of the power of compound interest, and there's been loads of other great insight across the conference in terms of how we get there. Because for those that are earlier on in their careers, perhaps that sounds like a really big number, but step by step, we get there. Do I have a little bit more time just to come back to the 4%, Hina, or should I do it in the chat?
We have half a minute to a minute. What would you like to do?
I'll be very quick.
Go on then. Go for it. Why not? It's always better verbally to hear it.
Yeah, I think so. But if anyone does want to, go away and read more, and I definitely encourage that, it's, you won't learn everything you need to know in one go. Go away and, write down the terms that are not familiar to you and go and learn about them. And this one is the safe withdrawal rate. It's a concept that you'll find if you do some Googling. And the 4% is based on this research from a financial advisor who looked all the way back to 1926 at people who had retired and said, okay, how much could they have withdrawn from their retirement pot until they eventually passed away without ever running out of money? And if they only ever took out 4% of that pot, they would never run out of money. That's what his research showed. And I did add the caveat that there are other schools of thought out there. We shouldn't hold ourselves to this, so tightly that, it's an indestructible rule. I presented it more just to get some context around the maths, which is something that I've found really helpful in my own financial journey.
That's fantastic. Absolutely clear. So thank you again, Catherine. Thank you. Can we have some appreciation for Catherine as well?